Well, a very warm welcome to you this afternoon. My name is Brian Webster Henderson, and I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Cumbria and one of the founders of the Staff LGBTQ Network here at the University of Cumbria. This afternoon, we're here in respect and marking LGBTQ+ History Month. And I'm joined this afternoon by some partners, and this is a collaborative panel discussion. And I'll introduce you to the panel in just a minute, but it's great that you've been able to join us. How we're going to run this afternoon is I'll introduce you to the panel, and then we'll ask the panel just to give a very short presentation from themselves, either about themselves or about their organisation in respect of the theme, A Life Worth Living. And then we're going to open up to some questions and answers to the panel. So if you do have a question, we'll take them just as we come to the last panelist, and you can either type them into the chat box or you can raise your hand and we'll bring you in to ask you a question. How we'd like to do this afternoon is we just want to be very upfront and say that this afternoon our expectation is that there'll be no swearing, no abuse of homophobic or any other kind. And if we do experience that this afternoon, we won't hesitate in putting you out of the call. We're here for a collaborative conversation and panel discussion to really celebrate LGBTQ History Month. So before we launch into the panel summaries, I want to just introduce you to the panel this afternoon. And I'd like to say from the very start, a huge thank you to all of them for being so willing to join in and be part of this panel this afternoon. So Ashley, if I can come to you just to introduce yourself, that'd be really great.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, and thank you for inviting me today. My name's Ashley Heaver. I am the Director of Talent Acquisition at Enterprise Rent-A-Car.
Welcome, Ashley. Robert, if I could come to you.
Hello, I'm Robert, and I'm from out in the Bay, in Lancaster and Morecambe.
Welcome, Robert. Thank you for sparing your time and being with us this afternoon. We appreciate it. Molly, I'll come to you next if I can.
Thank you, Brian. My name's Molly McConnell and I'm the Welfare Officer for the University of Cumbria Students' Union.
Thank you, Molly. Pam? You're on mute, Pam. Still on mute, Pam. So Rich, I'm going to ask if you can just help Pam with the unmuting there, and I'll go on to someone else. And Pam, we will come back to you if that's all right. Lewis, I'll come to you next if I can.
Thanks, Brian. My name's Lewis Turner. I'm Chief Executive of the charity Lancashire LGBT.
Thank you, Lewis, and very warm welcome to you. Terry, we'll come to you.
Hi, my name's Terry Abbott. Thank you, Brian. I'm the chair of the Lancaster University LGBT+ Staff Network.
Welcome, Terry. It's great to see you here. Jesse?
Thank you. Hi, my name's Jesse and I'm the LGBTQ+ officer for Lancaster University Students' Union.
It's great to have you here, Jesse. Thank you to yourself for being part of this and being so willing to be part of this. And finally, I'll go back to Pam. Pam, are we able to unmute you? That'll be a no. So Lee and Rich, before we go any further, any suggestions, please?
There's nothing I can do from this side. Pam, if you drop out and then join back in, that might work potentially.
Okay, Pam, did you get that? If you drop out and come back in, we'll try there. And if not, then I'll see if I can unmute you. Depends who has been the host. So while Pam's dropping off and coming back in, I'm going to go to our first panelist to help give their summary. And Ashley, I'm going to come to you first, if that's all right, and ask you just to present yourself to our audience this afternoon. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Brian. I'm sure I said I didn't really fancy going first, but Thank you. So, as I say, my name's Ashley Heaver. I'm the Talent Acquisition Director at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and I also head up our LGBTQ plus network, Enterpride. And our network has been up and running now for about 5 or 6 years. And one of the things that I want to talk about, spend a couple of minutes talking about, is how important role models are within our business. I was very late in life coming out, both personally and in the workplace. And then when I did come out in the workplace, there wasn't really very many role models, if any at all, that I could look up to or see, okay, they're like me, I know I can be successful in, you know, having a career at Enterprise. And so me and a couple of colleagues got together and we started working very closely with Stonewall. We've become a champion member, and we're a member of the Stonewall 100 now as well, which we're really proud of. And so we set up our network, Enterprise, and it's really grown from strength to strength over the past 5 to 6 years. And we've now been really able to have people within the business who see themselves as role models to others. And I know that my role within the business is so that other people who are joining Enterprise as a graduate on our program can perhaps look at me and say, actually, I know I can be successful, and it doesn't matter what my or where I'm from. So we've done a lot of work in that area of the business, and it's just been great to see, especially over History Month this month, that we've had so much engagement from all employees across the business, from sponsored cake bakes to rainbow laces to we've had different videos and webinars that have taken place amongst our employees, and people are really stepping up to see themselves as a role model. And as a, you know, for us as well, we've had some great allies that have worked in the business, and we know that in order to be, you know, you spend a lot of time working, and I know from my own experience that I would spend most Fridays thinking, okay, what can I make up about the weekend that I've got planned? And then most Mondays remembering, what did I make up about what I was doing at the weekend so I wouldn't be outed at work? And that wasn't, to me, a life worth living. And I think that for a business, you've got to have those role models. People have got to be able to come to be their authentic self. And that, to me, is really what a life worth living is about. So that's just my little story, Brian, and happy to answer any questions as we go on as well.
Oh, thank you, Ashley. That's really kind of you. We appreciate you being honest and transparent with us and sharing your story. And it may be that some of those things have resonated with people in the call this afternoon, that kind of lateness in life in coming out, and the whole issue about role models and how to be a role model. So we'll see if there are any questions later on. But thank you, Ashley. Jesse, I'm going to come to you next, if that's all right, and ask you just to spend a few minutes sharing your story with us.
Yes, certainly. Thank you. I've come here from Lancaster University Students' Union. A lot of the work we've been focusing on recently has been to do with campaigning, especially campaigning around intersectional groups. So groups who may fall into one or more minorities. So a big thing that we've been focusing on recently is the experience of LGBTQ plus people of faith. Members of faith communities are often left out in LGBTQ plus spaces, and vice versa. I myself grew up in a very conservative religious group, and sexuality, gender identity were not things that were talked about. In fact, it was quite shunned. So finding a space where I could be myself, where I could both practice my faith safely without judgment, but also be myself safely without judgment, was very difficult for me. And I'm not alone in that. In fact, it's quite a common experience amongst LGBTQ plus people of faith. And one thing we've discovered since starting to campaign at the university in Lancaster is that the more we campaign, the more people we find out actually do fit into this intersection and feel like they've been left out and feel like there's no space where they can be safe to be themselves. So as we're campaigning, we're looking at widening our campaigns. We've actually started up a safe space for LGBTQ plus people of faith. one of the members of the Student Forum exec, our faith officer, Luke, has taken on that role and is doing incredible work, working with different faith groups and working with the chaplaincy to ensure that there's safe spaces available for all students. And it's actually incredible to see the work that's gone on and the campaigning that's gone on to raise awareness of these different intersectional groups. And I know we have the Student Forum's BAME officer as well, Zan, there focusing on increasing awareness that of the problems that are faced by the LGBTQ plus BAME community. And really, there are a lot of minority communities and a lot of intersectional communities where the intersection between two groups is very much ignored by both groups. And so you get people falling into that gap where they're not necessarily feeling like they're cared for. And, you know, you don't feel like you have that life worth living, which is the focus of today's talk, is a life worth living. And so I know that from my experience, you know, this active campaigning, this working to change is what we're doing to create that experience where people feel like their life is worth living.
Jesse, thank you for that. I'm sure that will stimulate some questions in some of our audience and attendees this afternoon. I guess from a personal perspective, being brought up in, I wouldn't say a very strict Christian home, but a very Pentecostal Christian home, where homosexuality was totally frowned upon, it really did impact on my ability to be myself and come out till much, much later in life. I think I was 35 when I eventually took that step. And a lot of that was because of that fear about acceptance and not being accepted. So I shared a lot of what you're saying this afternoon. So really, really great to hear. Thank you. Lewis, I'm going to come to you next if I can, and just ask if you'd be happy just to share for a few minutes with us.
Thank you very much. I thought I was last, so that's good. I'm just going to talk about the theme for me with the life worth living really is I kind of agree with Ashley. It's about being your authentic self, and I'm just going to talk about the work of equality and inclusion to ensure that people can be their authentic selves. I'm just going to use a bit of a metaphor here, if you'll just indulge me. And I've often said this, and I'm probably not the first person to say this, but this kind of work, I always say, is like pushing a ball up a hill. So you have to keep pushing that ball because it can very, very easily begin to roll backwards. And I'm just going to mention a few of the challenges that we currently have about this kind of pushback against the ball. And the first thing is, of course, the COVID crisis, and we know that LGBT lives have been disproportionately affected in terms of mental health and well-being. And at the beginning of the lockdown, Lancashire LGBT, which is the charity I work for, we did a survey around Lancashire to see how it was impacting people. And we found that over a third of the people who filled in our survey said they could not be their authentic selves in the situation where they currently were in lockdown, which obviously is going to impact, you know, health and well-being. But at the same time, during this period, our charity has seen a huge increase in people contacting us who are coming out for the first time. And I'm kind of wondering if people have decided that life is too short to not be the authentic self. So we've had people of all ages, you know, up to 60 years old, and parents of trans children as well contacting us. So I'm wondering if people are thinking, you know, life's too short, you know, we need to be our authentic selves sooner than we thought, sort of thing. And I'm just going to touch on some of the current challenges as well. And if you just, I don't want to be too pessimistic here, but I think we need to be mindful in terms of that ball and keeping the pressure up. We've seen relentless attacks on trans and non-binary people in the last 2 years by the press and on social media, as well as speeches by government ministers hinting at checks and balances regarding trans people's hard-won rights. And I would say that probably with all of this, the trans women have been hardest hit. And this has got a real impact on lives. In terms of the work that we do, we've had 2 trans women that we've been supporting who have just started their transition, who have genuinely phoned us up and said, will my life be worth living when I transition? Because there's a current perception of this hostile environment. So that's really, really concerning. And also there's a press and judicial focus on young trans and non-binary people. And we also know that there's a push to curb LGBT inclusivity sessions in school settings. And I'm old enough to remember this is exactly how Section 28 came about, because suddenly the press were focusing on schools and a move to inclusivity, and it was like, right, we're going to have Section 28, so we're not going to allow people to talk about inclusivity in schools. So I'm very, very mindful of that as well. However, there is good news. It's often been said, if you're not counted, you don't count. And the latest census that's going to come out next month, for the first time ever, we will be counted. And that's really, really important, because first of all, it will end the speculation regarding how many of us there are, because there aren't any reliable figures about the LGBT population, and that's used often as an excuse to ignore us in terms of, for example, the distribution of resources to LGBT charities like ours and like Rob's. So for the first time, our lives and existence will be on the record, and that will be for future generations to see. So I feel very, very optimistic about that. But in order to ensure that all lives can continue to be worth living, we must never stop pushing that ball. Discuss.
Thanks very much for that, Lewis. Some really important messages in there. And perhaps people might want to pick up on those kind of negative expressions in school and some of the hostility that you talked about from your survey. I'm sure that might resonate with some members in the call this afternoon. We're just going to carry on going through our 7 panel members before we open it up to questions. Pam, are we able to bring you in now at this stage? Have we got you working?
Yes.
Yay! Pam, do you want to introduce yourself? Because you didn't get a chance to do that.
I'm Pam Eland. I work at the LGBTQ in Cumbria in Carlisle, but I also work for the organisation called Pride in North Cumbria, which is the youth LGBT group. I'm vice chair for Cumbria Pride, and I'm an honorary fellow at the University of Cumbria. I think during COVID it's been really difficult because we haven't been able to contact people in the usual way, like the face-to-face way. And I think the mental health of the young people especially is suffering. Fortunately, we set up a Discord project, so we can still keep in contact with young people. But just as Lewis was saying about the schools and things, I think it's going to be probably harder to get into schools because of all curriculum stuff they'll have missed out on. So in Cumbria especially, or in Carlisle areas, they're really reluctant to have us coming in and doing any sort of educational work. And I don't know whether it's because they don't know what's going to sort of be said, or whether it's because it doesn't fit into the curriculum, and which I think that's probably the main thing. I think there is positives of how LGBT is developing, but I do think once people see there's a issue and it's been solved, they forget about it. And my main thing with that is with hate crime. I think hate crime has gone off the boil a bit, and people forget about it. And but then it's really difficult to report because of getting evidence, and then because of getting convictions. But then I think the agendas happen, like there was modern day slavery sort of came into the forefront, and hate crime was forgotten about. But I think now hate crime's back into the forefront, so it'll have loads of money chucked at it and loads of focus on it, but it just depends for how long. And I think there's too much happening with LGBT, but it's like a one-off thing. It's like a token gesture all the time, and it's never put into the forefront as it's never going to be anything but a minority unless people see it as the norm, if you like. So, and it's always going to be highlighted. It's like with Black Lives Matter, that's in the forefront at the moment, but some bloke had to die very publicly for that, and it was mainly focused on the police because there's a lot of people who die, but because the police aren't involved, then it doesn't happen. Like trans people are getting killed sort of daily, but nothing's said about it. So I think it's that who gets behind stuff and pushes it forward. So unless you have all the minorities, I suppose, working together and becoming a majority, then there's always going to be issues with funding and with being recognised, and we've just been rolled out as token gestures. And that's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Pam, for that. Quite a lot there for us to take in around that, especially that minority perspective, and actually how not to be a minority and get your voice heard. And we may come back to that in some of the questions. There's one of the questions I'd been thinking about before today, which was around how do we get our voice heard a little bit more, and where do we need to have it heard? And we'll come back to that. So thank you for sharing that, Pam. We've got 3 panelists left to hear from. So Robert, I'm going to come to you next if I can.
Good afternoon. I'm Robert. So I'm one of the founders and the CEO for Out in the Bay, which is an LGBT plus charity that works in the Lancaster district. However, we are branching out a little bit more. We also run Lancaster and Morecambe Pride, which I'm absolutely proud of. Title of today is A Life Worth Living. Over the last 4 or 5 weeks, I've watched It's a Sin, and the word hope comes up. I was diagnosed with HIV in 1991. For someone like me in 1991, you were lucky if you were given 6 months to live, and you were treated very badly by everybody in society. I'm still alive. Obviously, my life went downhill a lot. I've beaten alcohol addiction, heroin addiction. I did 12 months in a rehab in 2007. The past 4 or 5 weeks with It's a Sin being on have absolutely ripped my heart out. So Out in the Bay itself provides support for people with any issue. We have a lot of volunteers who come to us. We like the idea that we create a family atmosphere for people. And for some people, it is a family. We run various support groups, youth groups, trans support, family support, and we try and keep everything up to date. My personal belief, one of our biggest values and ethics is that everybody's a human being, and we should be there for everybody who comes to us and be able to support that person with whatever their need is. And it's about being able to understand people when they come to us and try and help them. Sometimes sitting down and having a brew with somebody and a biscuit is an absolute winner. We know over the past 12 months, we've seen a massive increase in people coming to us for support. That's really difficult to work out how we can support all those people. But we do our best. So that's a little bit about me.
Oh, Robert, thank you for your honesty and for your willingness to share your own personal experiences of HIV and some of the challenges that you've overcome. I'm sure attendees in this call this afternoon will appreciate the honesty of that, but it also, again, might stimulate some questions for people. So thank you, Robert. We appreciate it. 2 more panel members to go. So I'm going to go to Terry next, if that's all right. Terry's from Lancaster University Staff LGBT Network. Terry.
Thank you, Brian. So the Lancaster University LGBT plus Staff Network is a small group of volunteers. It's Lancaster staff and postgraduate students, and we run this in addition to any other duties and responsibilities that we have. The network formed about 4 years ago. Initially, it was a group that was holding social events that allow people to be themselves, express their feelings and views in a safe environment. And we were also supporting the EDI team with their submission for Stonewall's Workplace Equality Index. Since then, our remit's broadened out a little. We're trying to create safe, positive and supportive working environments which empower people to reach their full potential, mostly on paper, we're doing this by helping create new policies and reviewing existing policies and procedures. One of our most recent initiatives, and one I've been very pleased to help with as an out trans man, has been to contribute to a transitioning at work policy, something that was seriously lacking at one of the previous organisations I worked at while I was transitioning, and why I think this fits with my theme of a life worth living. One of our other officers is also contributing to a new menopause policy to make sure this is inclusive, which it certainly hasn't been with regards to trans men and women in particular. We also recognise that role models are important. We're trying to make sure that there are visible role models throughout the organisation in order to give people the confidence to be themselves in the workplace. We're doing this by joining committees to make LGBT+ voices heard, by hosting public events with LGBT themes, and by having an out presence in the staff directory, and when we're in the office, by displaying flags, wearing lanyards and that sort of thing. A new initiative of which we're particularly proud at the moment is our network of LGBT+ allies. We currently have over 100 staff volunteers who identify themselves as a safe person for LGBTQIA+ students and other staff to speak to about their issues and concerns. And we're working to promote this network and make it more visible to students, as we think it's something that's particularly needed at the moment when so many students are isolated at home. And that's my bit.
Thank you, Terry. That sounds like a very active and a very busy staff network. And it just resonates with me from our own staff network, probably much more we could be doing together to share and to move agendas on. So definitely one thing we'll take away from this afternoon. And last, but by certainly no means least, I'm going to go to Molly from University of Cumbria Students' Union. Molly, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Brian. You left me till last on purpose, didn't you? Hi everyone, I'm Molly. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of kind of representation and visible representation in education. So I'm pansexual, which I didn't realise until I came to university, and it was only at university that I actually heard someone call themselves pansexual for the first time. And I had reluctantly identified as bisexual for a very long time, but never really felt like it fit. And it was when I went to Cumbria Pride, actually. It was my first ever Pride event when I came to university. And I went with someone who was part of the community as well, but wasn't the kind of LG or B or T. And then that was a really key moment for me, because they kind of introduced me to the different flags, the different labels and different names and things that I just hadn't really been aware of before. And also seeing people wearing those flags and identifying as that was really, really, really special and really important to me. And I think it had really made me reflect on when I was younger, and my lack of understanding of this had really led to an ignorance, and I'd hated all the labels. I hated the different names for things, and I felt like the community wasn't for me, and I really struggled to kind of get on board with all these labels and things, because I just none of them were identifying me in a way, and I hadn't seen them in real life examples. And so as part of the Students' Union, I'm doing quite a lot of work on this at the moment, and we're, as a team, the 3 officers, we're doing a lot of work to just make sure we are marking the awareness days and months and things like that, and just making ourselves and our stories really visible as well. And we're fortunate that the 3 of us are all part of the community, and all of us, well, none of us are the LG or B. So it's a really good opportunity for us to kind of promote and just make people aware of the other aspects of the community. We've also been working with our student network as well on a few things, which has been really empowering for them, and getting them involved in the trans student policy and the review of that. And then also just them knowing that we're coming from a place of kind of understanding and empathy. Like for Trans Day of Remembrance, I did a little post about my gender and my kind of thoughts and feelings about that, and how I'm still kind of learning about myself and things. And it prompted about four or five students to contact me directly about their struggles and the things that they'd been going through, and how they'd not seen anyone or had anyone identified as someone that they could go to with that sort of thing. And it was only my post and some of the other bits that I'd been doing on social media that had made them aware that I was someone they could go to. And so this is kind of where my passion comes from, in kind of normalizing these conversations and these labels, like especially in universities, where a lot of students do discover for the first time a lot of information about themselves, and in a very short space of time as well. And it needs to start earlier, really. College shouldn't have been, well, university shouldn't have been the first time when I heard the word pansexual, and I started questioning my sexuality from primary school, and it wasn't until university that I felt really solid in who I was and where I was. And just because no one had taught me those words, I needed to express myself. And so actually for a long time, I thought I must be cis and straight because I looked cis and straight, which is a strange logic, but that was just kind of where my head was at. And I thought, well, I'm going to marry a nice man and have 2 children and things like that. And I guess as well, growing up in a kind of white middle class home that just didn't talk openly about these sorts of things made me feel kind of too normal to be part of this sort of community. And so that kind of was quite alienating for me. And so for me, I'm really passionate that we need this kind of visible representation in nurseries, in schools, in colleges, in universities, and beyond, in wider society. And we need these children and these young adults to know who they are and to know that they have a life worth living.
Molly, thank you for that. I'm sure, again, that will resonate with a lot of people in this call, either as panelists or who are in attendance. So you've heard from our 7 panelists this afternoon, and a huge thank you to all of them. We are going to open up this panel session now to questions and answers. So if you have a question, please feel free to either raise your hand and ask the question. There's nothing off limits, I think, at this stage. Or if you would like to type it into the chat box, please feel free to do that. If your question is directed at anyone in particular, please say, and if not, we'll share it around the panelists, probably not all every time, but to hear different voices to the questions. So I'm going to go to David Whitaker first. David, do you want to pose your question?
I will do. I've unmuted, haven't I? Yeah, you can hear me, can't you? Yeah. I'm David Whitaker. I'm a town council in Morecambe and a councillor on Lancaster City Council. The question basically is to all members, and it's kind of a suggestion really, and it's in regard to education. A lot of schools, the whole curriculum is still living under the shadow of the ghastly Section 28, and bullying still goes on in schools nationally and internationally as well. My question is basically about the curriculum and what could be added to the curriculum. I think we need to lobby ministers and all politicians of all persuasions to include LGBT history in the curriculum, and also in doing so promoting positive role models of LGBT people in our history. For example, people like Stephen Fry, but also within the field of sports. So what do the panel feel about that suggestion, and is it something that collectively we can campaign for in regards to that important change in the curriculum? And also, apologies if I disappear at 4 o'clock. I've got to go to another meeting. Thank you.
David, what a great question. Thanks ever so much for that. And I'm sure lots of the panelists will have ideas. So I'm just going to go around a couple of the panelists just to hear their voice. Pam, I'm going to come to you first, since you talked about working with schools and some of the challenges you think that may have now because of COVID. But in response to David's question, what would your advice be?
There's an organisation called Schools Out, which I don't think gets enough highlighting anywhere. Basically, they've got a website, and they've got session plans or lesson plans for every subject from every year group, from infants up to seniors. So there's no reason why schools can't involve or put LGBT into session plans in every subject. I don't know how to. I haven't read them all, obviously, but it's as I said before, it's that afterthought sometimes, and it's like, History Month sort of being recognised now, which is great. LGBT Pride Month gets recognised now, which is great, but that's about it. I think when Molly was saying before about recognising different things, different sort of days, like we're doing the same within the centre, but it's hard to, well, it's not hard to choose which day, but because there's a day every month to recognise something LGBT plus. So but with the schools that can have displays up, you know what I mean, but it's almost the need to have it in the schools, because it's not a fad, it's not going anywhere. You know what I mean? And it's just, and I think the schools are kicking back so much. Maybe they're scared because of Section 28 and they still don't know what to do, because most of the teachers wouldn't have been educated in LGBT stuff anyway, because they would have been in that age group. So what, and unless you sort of say, right, we're coming in, we'll do your stuff, they're not going to do anything. But
training need.
Well, I'm sorry. All right,
training requirement for teachers.
Yeah,
David's talking a bit about a training need, Pam. I'm going to move on to some other panelists to try and bring some others into David's question. Robert, could I come to you for a moment in response to David's question around schools?
You certainly can. I'm with Pam on this one about the schools out stuff. I know for Lancaster and Morecambe, we offered every school LGBT awareness training, and one took us up on it. We offered them free LGBT awareness training. One took us up on it. It was absolutely brilliant. But there is something that needs to be done in schools. We've got a high percentage of the referrals we get from the police and CAMS are young people. And it's absolutely horrendous. And when you think a lot of this damage could be undone by simply having stuff in schools, I think it's something that needs to be done at a government level, and kind of, it has to be done from there. We, I think everybody here had offered to go in schools and deliver training. I think it's the schools that stop us from going in. We need to do something that way. So yeah, there's my kind of, I hope that helps.
Okay, thanks, Robert. And I'm going to go to one more panel member before we move on to some other questions. Jessie, can I come to you on that one from a school's perspective? So here you are, heading up a students' union in a university. What would you say to David, who is a counsellor, but asking around young people in schools?
Yeah, I mean, you make everyone's made very good points about the lack of schools accepting training. I would say that, sort of from my perspective, we do see the ramifications of that. A lot of students come to universities with little to no knowledge of the LGBTQ plus community at large, even in Lancaster. And I know that a big part of the problem is not only to do with training, but it's to do with the experience of the educators themselves. Many people who are teaching now were taught and brought up under Section 28 or just before then, and were not taught about LGBTQ plus relationships or life. And I know there was a project in around 2019 with Schools Out and Stonewall to introduce LGBTQ plus inclusive relationship and sex education in schools. But there are still many schools who are hesitant to do it because there's very few people in the schools who actually understand. And I think from all of us, it takes that push to keep offering this training, keep offering our knowledge and skills. And sooner or later, schools will start opening up. I mean, Rob from Out in the Bay, you've already had one school take you up on it. It is a shame it's only one school, but we've just got to keep pushing. And sooner or later, we will introduce more education, inclusive education in schools. There's a few other speakers want to speak.
Lewis, I can see you waving at me, so I'm very quickly going to bring you in. Then I am going to move on to another question, panelists. Sorry, but I really want to get as many questions in as we can. So, Lewis.
Thank you, Brian. I just wanted to say that Lancashire LGBT over the last 5 years has worked with over 50 schools that have approached us to support them with a young trans person transitioning at school. So there are pockets of very, very, very good examples. The majority of these schools have been primary schools by a small majority, and they've been really good. And a lot of the best schools have actually been schools in rural areas and faith schools. So it isn't all that bad. And we have actually had a programme of work where we've been engaging with lots of schools across the county, and the government have also paid for Stonewall to do their inclusivity work. The only thing is, at the moment, there is a memo that's gone around saying to schools, you are now forbidden to work with these different organisations that in the past they have actually funded to do work in schools. So that kind of goes back to my pushing the ball up a hill metaphor. But there are some good schools in Lancashire, and what's been also very interesting for me is when I've gone to these schools, there are quite a few head teachers who are openly out about their identities, which is fantastic and something I wouldn't have seen, even 10 years ago.
Thanks, Lewis. Thanks for that really responsive answer. I'm going to move on to another question, folks. Sorry, but I want to hear from different people in the audience. I'm going to go to Rachel O'Donovan, if I can.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel, and I work at the Students' Union with Molly. My question is sort of a two-pointer, and it really comes to what Lewis was saying about the census and whatnot. I don't know, you might be able to answer this for me, Lewis. So when you're talking about obviously recording about the LGBTQ plus community, is it a free box? Can people just write in, or so one of my concerns was I'm part of the plus part of the community, and I was afraid that it was just going to be limited to the main cited letters. And my second question, and just thoughts for everybody, was, do you feel, obviously this is going to give us a stronger indication of just how many members of the community there is in the UK, but with a lot of young people still living at home due to the current climate and whatnot, do you feel that it might take a couple of more censuses to come through before we get a true representation of that? That was just my question.
Thanks for that, Rachel. Lewis, I can see your hand up, so I'll come to you first, and then I'm going to go to Ashley to see if Ashley's got a response to that.
Thank you, Brian. I've spoken to the census people, and there is an option whereby if you are a young person in a household and the family fills in the sexual orientation bit on your behalf, you can actually contact the census people and get it adjusted after the fact. So they've got that option as well, which I think is really good.
Thanks, Lewis. Ashley, is there anything else you want to respond to that?
No, thanks for a couple of things. Thanks for the question, Rachel. I think that actually, before I start, I just want to go back to that schools piece, and something that I've done as well is that, and it goes to back what Robert said. I mean, I've watched It's a Sin, and it is one of the best programs I've ever watched for a long, long time. And I wrote that everybody needs more Jills in a blog that I did at work yesterday, but I think everybody needs more Roberts. So thank you for all the work you do, Robert. But I've really tried to, we talk about schools, I want to educate our workforce around things that have happened in the past and, in the 80s, and everything that, the struggles and challenges and the history that have gone to where we are today. So I've asked all of our senior leaders at Enterprise to watch that program and to really think about it and talk about it within the workplace and at home with their families as well, because I think that goes a long way to trying to break down some of those questions and stereotypes that have gone on. Rachel, back to your question. We do a lot of work in terms of trying to capture information from our employees, which it's looking at a different angle to your question. But so we look at it from when people are applying to us to get a job, and people are talking, why do you need to know this, or why do you want to know that? And it's really to ensure that what we're doing as a team and a recruitment team is that there's no biases in our process. We're being open to who we're attracting, and making sure that as a brand, people look at Enterprise and think, actually, I can go to that company and be myself. And the same when we're looking at how we ask people to give us their data and why they give us their data as an employee. As my job as the network lead for Enterprise, I want to make changes within the business. I want to make sure that our policies are being reviewed, and we just reviewed all of our trans policies last year, and the feedback that we got from all our employees was great. And this came from our network looking at some of the data and ensuring that as a business we were, representative of everybody who's working for us. So one of the reasons why we really want to get some of that data is to ensure that our business is there to, to make changes that are needed for us to make it a workplace where everybody can be themselves, which I know doesn't answer your question, but really sort of looks at why maybe employers are looking at, collecting that data. But it is a challenge. Not everybody wants to, does want to give you that data. And so we look at it we try not to do it as an HR thing. We look at it from our network and the importance, and our network talk about the importance of it, not just HR.
Thanks for that, Ashley. That's appreciated. I can see a couple more hands up, and then I'm going to go to Lee just to give us a summary of some of the questions that have been in the chat box. So I'm going to go to Jack Simmons guest in brackets. So Jack Simmons guest, do you want to come in?
Hello. I did it. I came out as a trans man in my second year of university at the University of Cumbria. This is my second term round coming out because school wasn't accepting of me. So even though I came from Brighton, which is quite surprising. So after recently experiencing some spread of misinformation, for a lack of a better term, on social medias and issues being raised with that, it's more sort of towards maybe the uni. I was talking to one of my lecturers, and they said it might be a really good idea maybe to get like students of the LGBTQ plus community to talk like during like months and stuff with other students, as well as getting higher up, like, or different sort of icons, so people can sort of share their stories within the uni so students can relate a bit more. Maybe that being an idea, or if that's a possibility. And I wonder if anyone sort of has any, like, I think education is like the pinnacle point, and I know it's been brought up a lot, that the education in schools is a real sort of must. And I just want to say thank you for everyone who shared their stories and helping with the community. It makes me feel warm inside. So thank you.
Thank you, Jack. And Jack, thank you for sharing your story with us on this call today. We really appreciate your honesty, and we give our support back to you. I'm going to go to Molly first and see if Molly's got an answer, and then I'm going to bring in Jessie and Terry just to see how they would respond. Molly.
I'm going to have to get a repeat of the question, I'm afraid, Jack, because I was just glowing with you talking. Sorry.
So my question was, using sort of a mixture of sort of like people, the community, and students as well that are in that community, and using them to educate other students. So me being trans and bisexual, talking to other students to make them aware what actually happens, because one of the issues was they didn't realize what happens to trans people when they get on treatment and stuff. So that kind of thing.
Yeah, I am really keen to try and implement some sort of mentoring type peer-to-peer sort of system in terms of that kind of thing. But I love your suggestion about actually kind of the network. Well, you didn't say the network, but students in the community, perhaps delivering some stuff for awareness raising and stuff. I think that would be incredibly valuable. Definitely, I think I completely agree with everything that Ashley's been saying about role models and things as well. But I think there's something really valuable about seeing it in your peers and people that you can relate to in your age group and that sort of thing. Yeah, I definitely completely agree. I'm sorry for making you repeat that, because I didn't realise it was a question, because I just sat here nodding going, yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, thanks for telling us.
So Molly, maybe that's something you and I should follow up on.
Yes, yeah. And Jack, I will message you.
Brilliant. Jesse, have you got a response to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thank you for sharing your story. That was brilliant to hear. I think the state of education for LGBTQ plus people is, let's be honest, abysmal. And I think there is a lot of misinformation around the experience of LGBTQ plus people, especially trans people and trans young people. And I know that's been an issue nationally and in the news quite a lot recently as well. One thing that we've been doing at Lancaster, because Lancaster has an unusually large population of trans students, is we've been doing talks on issues that affect us. We held a series of talks the other day on issues that we were interested in, just random things that we were interested in, and we put them on our YouTube channel, and they've attracted about 200 people around the world having a look at them and seeing what we have to say. I think actually seeing what people have to say and listening to the experience of LGBTQ plus people makes a lot of difference to education, and people learn a lot from other people's experience, a lot more than they'll learn in a classroom. And learning from experience, I think, is very important. So, I mean, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. I think finding people who are, especially students who are willing to talk about their story, to talk about what's going on in their life, is incredibly important. I think that can change the situation and change the dialogue for a lot of people.
Thanks, Jesse. Appreciate that answer. Thank you for that. Terry, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Oh, just a little point, really. Thank you, Jack, and just supporting what Molly and Jesse said. But I do recognise there's a real difference between having a role model of your own age or similar, or trying to support. You know, if I'm trying to support someone who's 19 or 20, as a 51-year-old who transitioned 15 years ago, my experiences are really going to be quite different in a lot of respects, and I might not be as able to support as I would like. So we do need more role models of a similar age.
Thanks for that, Terry. Jack, just so you're aware, recently at the university, we had a guest speaker come and speak to our leaders in the university on the whole issue of reverse mentoring. That's using students to mentor our leaders in the organisation, and students from different backgrounds, and actually looking at examples of how that could empower leaders to be aware of people's different backgrounds and how therefore it might affect their role and their leadership. So there is a great idea there around role models, but there's also an idea there about reverse mentoring, and it's actually used in lots of organizations and how it can benefit people, and using students and equipping students to do that from different backgrounds is quite a powerful way forward. Lee, we've got 6 minutes left. Just give us a flavour of some of the questions that have been in the chat box.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I've had some great questions in the chat box, so thank you for attendees for popping those in. One of the first ones that I kind of noticed on early response was that I'll just kind of read it out verbatim. Pam mentioned tokenism in her time, and in my dissertation, I explored the experiences of LGBTQ plus people at university. One recurring theme that continued to be brought up was this idea of tokenism and actions intended to help LGBTQ plus students being misguided and missing the mark. Participants talked about things only being implemented out of tokenism. I wondered how the panel worked to avoid tokenism when trying to adapt their workplaces / universities for LGBTQ plus inclusion. Thank you to Louise for popping that in there.
Thanks for that, Lee. Very quickly, panel members, is there a response that you would like to give to that? I'll start with Lewis first, if I can, around how do you avoid tokenism? Lewis, do you want to come in? Brilliant.
I'm not so sure I can answer that question adequately and succinctly. So I'll pass on to somebody else.
Okay, Lewis. Pam, would you like to come in there?
I think you've just got to include LGBT in everything and not make it something special, if you like. You know, just one question I wanted to ask: does because the university teaches teachers, doesn't it? So do they include an LGBT section in the teaching?
Do you mean in our curriculum for teachers?
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that, Pam, but I can certainly find out.
I hope they do, because it would be, if we're going on about it and going to tokenism, then it's like, well, you know, we're not going to get things into school unless the teachers are being educated.
I would say to avoid tokenism, it has to be part of all curriculum, not just teachers' curriculum, but all curriculum.
I'm not saying it's not meant to be everything, but I'm just thinking if it's not being taught to people who are teaching,
sure,
going to be teachers, then how are they expected to teach it?
Lee, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just briefly, because it's a really fair question, Pam, and one that was posed in another sort of conversation recently. Professor Sally Elton Childcraft, who is quite heavily involved in that area, does run a full EDI module. So obviously it covers the full spectrum of EDI, and that's for our teachers. So obviously that will be incorporated into that curriculum there.
Robert, any comments on avoiding tokenism from your experience?
It's a very difficult question. It's about the kind of values and ethics you create around you. We always look as an LGBT group, people will come to us, and it's how do we attract everybody without trying to leave anybody out. There are some complicated answers, but I ain't gonna. Tokenism's a really hard one, because sometimes you look at something and think, for example, our board of trustees, 90% women, but we're all white. That's a problem. But for where we are, what, you know, without being tokenistic, what do we do about it? There are plenty of things we can do that we are trying to do. It's about successfully recruiting trustees from certain other backgrounds. But yeah, tokenisms are really, we get it a lot with Pride. Somebody thinks that because they buy into or sponsor Pride, that ethically they're doing really well for the LGBT community. And sometimes there are some people who, even if they wrote a check for £1 million, we'd send it back to them. So it's about us verifying who we're working with, I think, sometimes, and checking that we are working with companies that ethically are supporting LGBT people constantly, and don't just think that flying the flag for one day is going to promote them in a good light. So, you know, we work very closely with Enterprise. We work with the people in Manchester, I think. And I've forgotten the guy's name, and he's going to kill me for not remembering it. So, but it's, you know, there are certain companies who we ask anything of them who will support us with anything during the year. So I think it's really hard work, because to put on a Pride, you need a lot of money.
Okay, so thanks, Robert, for that, and appreciate the answer. I'm conscious of time, but Charles has had his hand up for quite a long time, so I'm going to finish this afternoon's webinar by going to Charles for his question, and we'll get some elevated responses from panel members. Charles.
Hi, so I just wanted to discuss two topics, really. It was just one, I'm a recovered addict from codeine, Valium, and GHB. GHB? GHB. And I'm aware of there being a huge problem with drugs within the LGBT community, and I feel that's something that we ought to be tackling. within the community and isn't really addressed enough, and it is a huge issue that goes on. I'm recovered now and a student rep and studying psychology at the University of Cumbria. But also the other thing I was going to mention is hate crime. So when I first moved to Morecambe, I was a victim of a hate crime on a bus on the way from Lancaster to Morecambe, and it really affected me quite deeply. I went to court. The person was convicted. I did ask that they weren't put into the criminal justice system, into prison, and I just felt that hate crime still is something that needs to be addressed, and even though things are progressing with social media, it's something that we should probably discuss, perhaps.
Charles, two huge issues for us to end on, and I'm sure we're not going to be able to do them justice in the time we've got left.
Yeah, I apologise.
Not at all, not at all. But I'm very quickly going to go to Molly and Jessie about the issue of drug misuse and alcohol misuse in the LGBT community, and to see what we should or are doing about it. So Molly, can I come to you first? And a 1-minute answer, no longer, if that's okay.
Yes, I'll try. This is quite a big one, and actually something that I've only become aware of recently. And I think an awareness is definitely needed. Some sort of awareness raising is definitely needed as it being a problem. I think not many people recognise that is a problem, and I would love to do some work on that side of things, definitely. And I think definitely having some sort of identified support for the community in kind of institutions and companies and that sort of thing, but also having that open conversation about drugs and drug use and alcohol misuse and things as well, because I think a lot of people feel ashamed to be able to talk about it and to be able to say that I have been using drugs or whatever the case is. And we need to have these open conversations, and we need to make people empowered enough to not feel they're going to be kind of penalised for coming forwards with their problems and the challenges. Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you.
Thanks, Molly. Jessie?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thank you for your question. I would say that a big part of the problem is the way in which we educate people. I think there is this thing that people are taught from school: drugs are bad, don't do drugs. That's not the same as education, though. I think we need to focus on encouraging a safe and consensual conversation in a space that people are safe within to discuss drugs and discuss the issues that we face as a community. And yes, to educate them on the effects that they have in a manner that is safe and consensual, that allows people to actually discuss their own experiences. I think a part of the problem that we have as a community is that we have a large proportion of people suffering from various forms of addiction, and we also have a large proportion of people in our community who are recovering or recovered from addictions. And the people who are recovering and recovered from addictions are often not welcomed in the same safe spaces as the people who are struggling with those addictions. And I think there is a point at which we need to bring the community together to discuss this as a group, as a community, so that the people who are struggling can learn from the people who've been through that already.
Thanks for that, Jessie. And there's a nurse who used to specialise in drugs and alcohol. I could say lots of things about different approaches and different therapies, but actually one of the biggest impacts is hearing voices from others' experiences and narratives and learning from their journey around how they combated it, got over it, or have dealt with it is one of the most powerful ways forward. I'm conscious we've run out of time, Charles, but I'm not going to have time to answer the last question on hate crime. I'd like to thank all our attendees this afternoon for participating in this call, but I'd really like to thank our panel members. I'd like to thank Ashley and Molly, Jessie, Terry, Robert, Pam and Lewis. Thank you for giving up your time, for being so open and transparent. And I hope that those of you that have joined us this afternoon have benefited from the richness of the conversation, the honesty and the transparency. And it would be an absolute crime if I didn't say a huge thank you to Lee McDermott at the University of Cumbria for bringing this together, pulling it together, organising it and pushing it forward. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Have a good evening and thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.